Hey, everybody, welcome to Odd and Untold, the podcast where we talk about all things strange and spooky. And this is episode 50, which is kind of crazy to me. Doing this almost a year now. So we have to have a year, an anniversary show soon. But joining me once again is my buddy John from the British Highlands, the moors there. One
This
of
is
Aleister Crowley's old estates, perhaps.
yes, in fact, it is Aleister Crowley's oldest estate. It's very chilly here for various reasons.
Well, we can see out your window again. That scenery never really changes. That's a great thing about Britain, I guess. Just
It's amazing. It's picture perfect.
picture perfect. Those
Always.
moors.
Yes. For the Moors.
For the Moors. Did you know Aleister Crowley lived like right off of Loch Ness for a period?
I did not know that, but I'm not at all surprised.
Yeah,
I
he
see
had
Aleister on the back of Nessie
yeah,
swimming along.
I forget where I read that. I think it was Nick Redfern's book. He did a book on lake monsters and stuff. So I think he had it in
Cool.
there. Yeah, he's a Brit. Cool guy. But he talked about Aleister Crowley having an estate like on Loch Ness. And I don't think he was really interested in the monster so much because he was
Right.
Aleister Crowley and interested in other stuff.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so I don't see the lock behind you. The lock.
It's on the other side.
Ah.
I'll have to shift the camera
Aye,
one
laddie.
and we can look at it.
Yeah, next time go to one of the other turrets or bastilles in your
Yeah.
mansion.
Yes, that's exactly where I'll go. I'll go to the North Tower.
The North Tower.
You'll be able to see it from there.
All right, cool. Maybe we'll get a Nessie sighting
That would be amazing.
while we do
This
an
is a
episode.
great show for it. So
Yeah. So you're back tonight, and you're going to be talking some more ghost stories, but more on the sort of spiritual side rather than the spirit side, which I think is really cool. I think, we were kind of talking about this prior to recording here, just that I think a lot of ghost stories miss that sort of connection. People
yeah,
focus on the creepy aspect, the spooky aspect, how they got scared, trying to catch an EVP, trying to catch it on camera. They don't really think about the spiritual side of it and the implications of that if indeed these things are spiritual.
right.
So yeah, I'm interested to
So
hear some of your stories tonight.
oh sure, okay. So first I want to say that I happened to rewatch the first episode that I was on, episode 7, just because I was curious. As you said, you've been doing this for a while, and I've been coming on as your guest for a while, and I just wanted to see how things have evolved over time. And in listening to that episode, it made me think of some things that I wanted to talk about this time. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about was something that happened when I was very young. It happened in 1979, 1980, somewhere around there. I'm not exactly sure. I know the circumstances of where I was, but I'm not entirely sure because I was so young. It wasn't like I was keeping a journal or anything. And I wrote it down just because I wanted to get it right, just get the language right. So I'm
Hmm.
just going to take a second to read it here.
All right, cool.
Okay. So from my earliest days, I've always known that I wasn't alone. Someone was always with me wherever I went. It was in the warmth of the sunshine in winter, the cool breeze of Coney Island, the way my sister laughed. It kept me safe when my parents would fight, which was often. It made me feel safe. So I knew I didn't have to be afraid when I was in the dark. I was raised in the church by my mother, as my mother was before me. As the eldest daughter, she was given the great honor of being offered to the church. She was to become a nun, but the absence of choice made her flee that life and that country, though she never wanted to flee from God. She decided that she wanted to raise me, my brother, and my sister in the church. The church was my home, a quiet and safe place away from the destructive storms that were all too common in our little Brooklyn apartment. One Sunday morning, I wandered away from the large service in the upper church and walked into the small chapel underneath. It was empty except for me. I walked to the first pew and sat across from the tabernacle. That day, I felt the presence of God, not in the way where I always knew I wasn't alone, but with a total sense of well being, happiness, and warmth. I was safe and loved just as I was. It was so simple, yet so complete, brief but eternal. So that's just a little story that I wanted to share. And now the sun is blinding me. And one of the things that I said in episode 7 was that I don't usually talk about religion or politics because I don't want to upset or offend anybody. And, people are entitled to their opinions and they have every right to voice them. So you have the ability to believe that there is a larger force in the universe or not, and worship that larger force in the universe any way that you wish or not at all. So it's very sensitive and it's also very private for me. So I'm sharing that story, and this is just something that I felt like the real presence of some larger force in the universe that was a creative and nurturing force that was watching over me, taking care of me. You can use lots of different words, but I have not felt it that in that way since that moment. And like I said, it seemed to go on for a long, long time, but I was 5 or 6 years old. Eventually, the mass upstairs would have ended and somebody would have come to find me and it would have been over. Um, so it was a really special thing. I never forgot it. And I don't usually talk about it for the reasons that I said, but I wanted to talk about it now just because it is, as you were saying before, a spiritual event that I went through when I was very young, and it wasn't a ghost story. It's not spooky, but it was definitely something that I very much felt was real.
Yeah, and that it's unusual for a child of that age to sort of feel that. I feel like that's something that an older person who's religious and might feel that way. Not that it takes away from an older person's experience with that, just for them being older, but children of, 6 or 7, however old you are at that time, very young, um, don't typically have those sort of spiritual epiphanies and just that feeling of feeling safe. Kids are very susceptible. They're kind of taking in stuff from the media, and so yeah, kids don't usually have these sort of deeper experiences. It's usually something a little bit more cartoonish, especially at that age. You get into the teenage years, the deeper thinking can kind of creep in. Um, but it reminded me of a story of my own that I also don't share, but has always stuck with me. And it was shortly after my grandfather died. I was about 10, and I had this dream, and I was just in what I thought at the time was a park, and it was just the sunniest of sunny days, the greenest of green grass, the greenest of green trees, and there was a picnic table. And I was just sitting there crying. And my grandfather, who had just passed, who I wasn't really close to, who wasn't the typical grandfatherly type,
Yeah.
he worked very hard. He kind of, um, no doubt that he loved us, but he was from a different generation, very stoic, blue collar.
Sure. Mhm.
Um, and he just came over and sat next to me, and he said, it's going to be okay. I'm okay. I'm happy. And that was the dream, and I woke up and I was crying, like, and again, he was not somebody that I was very close to, and I was only 10, I was very young, and kids at that age still have trouble dealing with death. And it really wasn't until I got older that I realized how kind of symbolic that dream was, especially as a child. It wasn't, you'd think a child would think, okay, I'm going to be up in heaven. It's going to be clouds and angels playing harps.
Yeah.
And, my grandfather's going to come over to me wearing the white robes and the wings. He's going to have a halo, and he's going to, say, oh, I'm okay, Jason. Everything's okay. And it really wasn't. It was just this perfect day. Like I
Yeah.
said, the sunniest of sunny days, the bluest of blue skies, everything was green. I remember it was like paradise. It wasn't heaven. It wasn't the cultural sort of manifestation of heaven that you see in cartoons or TV shows or sitcoms or whatever. It was just like a park not even a park though. It was just outdoors, and he was just dressed normally. He wasn't like wearing angel robes. He didn't have a halo. Um, and it was just again something that didn't even strike me until later that like, wow, this is a weird dream for a 10-year-old to have. And it was weird for me at the time, but I didn't really put two and two together until I was older. And so to this day, it's like a one of those things I don't think is paranormal, but it's very sort of spiritual for me. And I don't know what it means, but it just, if I'm gonna picture heaven, that's what heaven's gonna look like. It's just gonna be like a beautiful day outside.
Yeah.
Um, and he was happy, and he was just comforting me. It was weird. So your story, because again, you'd sent it to me prior to us recording here, and it reminded me of that, just that moment, just a feeling. It's not a ghost story, but just that sense of peace and calm and like.
Yeah.
So I thought your story was interesting for that reason.
Yeah, very profound. And you say you had it when you were 10. I mean, 39 years later, you still remember it. I mean, there's some dreams that I remember as well. Nothing nearly as nice as that. But, this what happened to me, I was 5 or 6 years old, and I still remember it very clearly to this day. So obviously it had a long lasting effect on us in a positive way, I think.
Yeah, definitely. That's what I'm saying. Like a lot of ghost stories, people talk about them because they're spooky, they're scary.
Which we've
Uh,
talked about on this show,
oh,
things other things that have happened.
absolutely. And I think, that's just part and parcel of it. It's what you don't understand is going to be scary. You see a shadow figure peering in your window, or
Right.
you hear what sounds like a doll dancing outside your bedroom door, clicking the
Yeah.
castanets. Like
Oh
that's
my.
going to scare you because it doesn't make sense and we don't understand it. And it's one of those things. If we did understand it, maybe it wouldn't be so scary. If we just knew this was
Sure.
the ghost of a departed grandparent or something just coming along and trying to, cheer us up or whatever, you're like, and you'd smile and laugh and be okay with it. But because we don't understand it, it's terrifying and creepy. But these stories are a little bit different. They're comforting. Like, you were 5, 6, and you felt very comforted, and I felt very comforted in my experience. So it's just uh, interesting how that works, and just because it is more spiritual than supernatural, I think.
Yeah. And I never I never forgot the event, and I never really tried to quantify it, really. It was just something that happened. It had a lasting impact on me, something that was positive and has never left me. So I'm very grateful to have experienced something like that in my life. And I know that not everybody has, and that's totally fine. I mean, it was a unique experience to me, and I just wanted to say, especially when you talk of spirituality and religion comes up, uh, I certainly don't want to say that this is the way to God. For instance, whatever path that people find God on is, as far as I'm concerned, entirely valid. So I don't want to impose my own personal beliefs or push them on anybody. I would never want to do that. That's not what I'm about. I just wanted to tell this interesting story that has never left me.
Yeah, we try not to get too much into the religion or politics on here. It can
Right.
be tough sometimes. You're talking about spiritual things.
Yeah.
God is going to come into it, or religion or belief is going to come into it, because if you believe in God and you see a UFO, how do those two things reconcile?
Right.
If you believe in God and you see a Bigfoot, how do those two things reconcile? You're trying to make sense of things. So it's hard to avoid religion, but yeah, we're not here to judge anyone's belief system, whether
Not at all.
whether you're religious, whether you're atheist, whether you're agnostic. Uh, you know, we all kind of find our own way in life, how we find our way in life, and that's just
Exactly.
the way we got to do it. And no judgment for anybody.
Not
Uh,
at all.
I think the only time I really judge is when people are just adamant that their belief is correct. And, because I think that in itself is judgmental. If you're saying, no, I'm right and you're wrong,
Sure.
that is sort of, wrong in my mind. I think you got to have that open mind. And if you're Jewish, if you're Muslim, if you're, Christian, if you're agnostic, atheist, whatever it is, I try to respect that and not say, you're wrong. I guess I disagree with you. But I'm not going to say you're wrong. So anybody who comes and says, well, you're wrong because, God doesn't exist, or you're wrong because, God does exist. Um, I think anybody who speaks in, only the Sith speak in absolutes. So
Please, Disney, do not sue us for that. That would be
oh,
terrible.
oh, you'll be hearing from my attorneys. Oh,
Yeah, yeah. Oh, Mickey. But yeah, only a Sith speaks in absolutes, which in itself is an absolute.
right.
So I wonder about Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Yeah. Yeah. So, uh, so those are the only people I really ever judge. Anybody else is like, as long as you have an open mind, believe what you want to believe, and just respect others' beliefs. So
Yeah,
yeah,
that's always the biggest thing for me, just respecting other people and what they believe. We're dealing with infinite space and time, and our minuscule portion of that existence. How much can we understand? I think it's more important that we try to understand, whatever it is, whether that there is something larger or that there isn't, and somehow making peace with that. And I,
right. And I think that's where our beliefs come from. It's just, we're exposed to different things, whether it's from our parents, whether it's from our teachers, whether it's from our friends. We're exposed to things and we kind of latch on to what makes the most sense for us. And there's plenty of people who, all right, I'm going to raise my kid Catholic, and the kid grows up and by 16, the kid's like, I'm renouncing Catholicism, because they've made up their own mind. Or vice versa. You could raise a kid kind of more agnostic or, just not very religious, and they can hit 15 and they have a friend who's religious, and that speaks to them and they will latch on to that religion, whichever religion it happens to be. But I think we, ultimately we all kind of find our own way and what speaks to us. And that's what we believe in. We're not born just believing certain things. We're not, raised in a vacuum. We're raised with television and radio and music and culture and family and friends. And so all of those things sort of influence us, and we kind of decide what to latch onto and what not to latch onto. And some of us are more religious than others. Uh, and that's fine too. But we're all just looking for answers. It's just how we go about finding those answers.
yeah, and I think some people from what I read might be able to discern what tradition I was brought up in, but there was a reason that I didn't say what it was specifically because for me it doesn't really matter. For me, yes, I was brought up technically in one particular faith, but my mind is very open to possibilities. And as we were talking about right before we started recording as well, part of those possibilities, of course, is science. And not disregarding what science has to say, what they have to bring to the table. Because science and faith, for me, are different things, but can also be part of the same thing. Who's to say that God is an engineer who created all of this? He's the one, or God is the one who started the Big Bang. He's the great engineer of life in the universe. So those two things don't have to be mutually exclusive.
Right. And I mean, the universe has a lot of uh, logic and rationale in it. I mean, with science, with math, I mean, these are just
Sure.
universal constructs that exist, the laws of physics, the laws of math. Uh, so who's to say that God didn't build this into his creation? If, like you were saying, an engineer, and if an engineer is building something, there's a rhyme and a reason for everything. This causes that to work, and that then causes this to work. And these systems are all kind of interdependent on each other. So who's to say that God didn't build these things into his creation so that we could understand it, so that we could sort of communicate these things and not just have this random existence of, you know, sitting in a cave, you know, eating mammoth meat and roasting it over a fire. And, we evolve because we discover things, we learn things. There's patterns to things. And so, yeah, I don't think science and religion are necessarily mutually exclusive, like some people would have you think that
Right.
you can't, who's to say that God didn't engineer evolution. So you're saying, oh, you can't be evolution because God created us in his image. Well, maybe not immediately, maybe there was a process to this. It's
Right. In
like if
fact,
we,
that process is why God is God,
right. It's not
because
just about planting it there and saying, boom, here it is.
yeah,
It's like planting a seed and letting it grow and develop and, uh, you know, kind of
mapping
like,
out how that would happen
right.
over millions of years.
Exactly. Exactly. So, and again, that doesn't prove that God exists. It just says science doesn't necessarily exclude God or a God, or
You're right. It doesn't
it
have to.
doesn't have to, not at all. Um,
And
and
again,
again,
these are our personal beliefs, and we're not saying that other people need to believe these things at all. You know,
right. It's just another possibility. It's just
yeah,
an open door, just something to consider, that we all need to consider.
right. The possibilities,
Possibilities.
as Spock would say,
Yes.
possibilities. Lots of science fiction today.
Yes. Star Wars, Star Trek, get it
Yeah.
all out.
All right. So there's actually two more parts. When I was thinking about what I was going to talk about today, I linked three events that have happened to me. That was the first one. The second one happened a little while after that, and I was just on a family vacation. We went to Mexico, and we were in Acapulco, and something very unusual happened to me. Um, this was back in the 80s, of course, so there weren't a lot of my parents were not around. Let's just cut to the chase. They were not around. And I was being cared for by my older brother, who's 4 years older than me, and my older sister, who's 3 years older than me. And I was 7 at this point. So we went to the beach and we went out into the water. And I didn't know how to swim, by the way. I just want to be clear about that before I even get further into the story. And I had this brilliant idea in my 7-year-old mind that I would go out as far as I could to warn the others about the waves that were coming. As would happen, an enormous wave came up over me and just completely swallowed me. There was a pretty strong riptide. I could feel myself being pulled out into the ocean. And the unusual thing happened at that point where I could see myself tumbling. I could see my body tumbling through the water and as if I was another person.
Hmm.
I was seeing it. I very distinctly remember I could see my left arm at a distance from me and my body just tumbling in that direction. Um, I watched that for a few moments and then I don't know what happened. I closed my eyes, I opened my eyes, and then I was not back on shore, but I was about waist deep. I have no idea how I got there because I felt the riptide pulling me out, and then I just was waist deep, and I was coughing because I had swallowed water, and then I just headed towards shore. But it's so distinct in my memory, even as I'm telling it. It was dark. There was some light behind me on the other side, and I could just see myself tumbling and tumbling. And as I said before I started the story, I didn't know how to swim, and I don't know how I got back on shore.
Hmm. So it's very reminiscent of like an out of body experience.
Yeah,
Um,
I was 7. I didn't know what an out of body experience was.
I was going to say again,
We
this
were
is this
talking about
is
the shadow person. I saw something. I didn't know what it was. I told you, and then you knew what it was.
right.
So as a 7-year-old, I didn't know what was happening. I just knew what I saw. Just like in the other story, I knew what I felt. But beyond that, I didn't know exactly how to decide what it was.
And it's weird because out of body experiences are usually reported when a person is kind of at death. It's they were on the operating table, they were in a bad accident. Typically, they were dead. Clinically dead. Their heart had stopped beating or whatever, and the paramedics are trying to resuscitate them or hospital staff are trying to resuscitate them. And then when they come back, they report, yeah, I was like floating above my body. I was kind of looking down at my body. So it's interesting for me. And as you're telling me the story, I'm thinking more of like Tale of the Body Thief by Anne Rice, Vampire
Yeah.
Chronicles. Um, because she kind of describes this, and for people who don't know what we're talking about, there was this character in the book who was a body thief, and he could sort of push souls out of bodies, and they didn't have to be near death. He just kind of would push the soul out of the body and kind of take over the body, hence the body thief,
Right. And
um,
run off with it.
and run off with it. But the
Do
soul
all
would
sorts
kind
of
of
mischief.
be pushed out and see their body and see someone else controlling their body. So that's kind of what came to mind as you're telling me this, because you're being pulled out by the riptide, but you're not drowning, you're not unconscious, like you're watching yourself like struggle. And,
Yeah.
and again, a lot of out of body experiences, it's people will tell you, oh, I saw my body on the gurney, I saw my body on the operating table, I saw my body laying on the ground after I got hit by the car. They're unconscious, their heart has stopped, they were technically dead when they had this experience. So yours is a little unusual, and it's very sort of body thief esque. Like James Raglan came and pushed you out of your body.
Yeah. And of course, the way that you are describing it is just creating a lot of fear and anxiety in me right now.
I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. Um, I remember it was high school when we first got introduced to the Vampire Chronicles by Anne Rice, and it was me first, and I introduced them. And reading that story, The Body Thief, that was in the '90s by that point. Uh, it made me think of what had happened because at
Mhm.
that point I had been watching something like Unsolved Mysteries, and Robert Stack would talk about out of body experiences, and I sort of created some sort of distance because I was thinking to myself, well, I didn't die unless, I mean, that wave like really knocked the life out of me, or did the wave knock my consciousness, knock my soul out of my body? I'm not exactly sure what happened. And that's what allowed me to see my body struggling in the riptide. Um, but I don't know what it was, and I don't know how I got back on shore. But it was definitely something, perhaps involving my soul or my consciousness or whatever it is that you want to, how whatever terms you want to use to describe it. But it was very strange, and nothing like that happened before or since.
Yeah, it's just a very unusual experience. Like you said, one, just because you're a kid, and kids don't really know what out of body experiences are.
No,
Especially if you're not brought up around that. I was kind of raised on In Search of and a
yeah,
lot of
right.
these, so I may have heard about them at the time. I don't know if but I've never, as far as I know, I've never had an out of body experience where I was outside of my body looking at it. Um, so that's weird. And again, like you didn't wash up on shore. You were like walking back to shore. Like you said you were waist deep. So you're standing up. It doesn't sound like you were knocked unconscious. It doesn't sound like you were clinically dead. And again, a lot of scientists will say that the out of body experience is not spiritual, it's not religious, it's not paranormal. It's simply the brain trying to cope. Which I don't know if I believe, because there's so many stories of people seeing things that they shouldn't have seen. It's not
Yeah, that they
just
couldn't know otherwise.
right. A lot of people say, "Oh yeah, I saw a light," and I saw the same thing when I was undergoing my eye surgeries, but it's because they had a bright light. When you're in an operating room, they're going to have a bright light over you. So all you see is this bright light. But other people will tell you they've levitated out of their body and they saw another accident victim next to them on the road or in the hospital, or and then a family member or doctor will confirm that story and be like, yeah, that person was there, and you shouldn't have known that because you were unconscious the entire time. So how did you see that person? Uh, so that to me is interesting, where it's not just you're seeing the white light and no, go to the light, that sort of cliche. It's you're seeing your body. And in your case, it's very interesting because you're not seeing your dead body. You're not seeing the doctors trying to resuscitate you or laying in the street bleeding out, you're seeing yourself, struggling against the riptide. So it is really interesting. And yeah, that's why Body Thief sort of uh jumped into my head, to pardon the the pun there. Because yeah, that's what it reminded me of, almost like your soul got knocked out of your body. Not that you were having like a near death experience, because I don't think you were near death. It's just almost like your soul or your consciousness or whatever you want to call it got pushed out of your body for for a little bit. And who knows? Is that just psychological, you know, compensation for the trauma, or? But it sounds like it really happened. At least in your experience, it happened to you. This is what you experienced.
I wonder how quickly these things happen. I to this day, I haven't read up on. I've seen it, stories about out of body experiences, like you said, in literature, like The Body Thief or In Search of, which I loved, Unsolved Mysteries, whatever it is. But I haven't really read up on other people's experiences because I never equated mine with that. But I wonder how quickly it happens. How obviously there's a span of time where your heart can stop, you can stop breathing before you suffer brain damage. I think it's about 4 or 5 minutes. So how quickly does the experience happen? Did the force of that weight of water falling on me knock the breath out of me? Did it stop my heart for a second? Was that enough time for me to have this experience? And then me getting back on shore, I don't know how that happened.
Yeah, just weird. And it reminds me of another movie, which many people may not remember, Flatliners.
Yeah, I
Remember that?
love Flatliners. Not, I haven't seen the remake, by the way, just to be clear, but the Kiefer Sutherland, Julia Roberts, that movie is just amazing to me. I love that movie.
Yeah, we went to go see it together. I don't know if you
Yeah,
remember.
yeah, absolutely.
uh,
Like, how long can you actually be dead without suffering brain damage? How long can you be dead before you can be brought back? And
right.
what happens in that time where you are clinically dead? What does
Hmm.
that mean? You know?
Yeah. So, yeah, it's an interesting thought because, yeah, if you were, you could have just been clinically, technically dead for even just a couple of seconds before your heart,
Right.
because it does happen sometimes where the heart will stop. People have heart arrhythmias. People have all sorts of things where it'll stop and you kind of like, oh, and then it starts up again. Yeah. And for I guess for those moments you're technically dead because your heart's not beating its regular beat. Uh, and again, I don't know what the medical consensus is on that, but yeah, how
Yeah, I would like to
quickly.
talk to a doctor about it, honestly, and tell the doctor this is my experience. Can you explain it? Add that scientific aspect to the conversation of what happened to me.
Yeah, and I don't think they would know. I think that's, death is still just very much a mystery. What
Sure.
happens, and again, there's theories of just that as we die, the brain just fires in neurons, and it's, you see a light flash before your eyes, and all these sort of euphemisms and sayings and cliches of I, go towards the light and my life flashed before my eyes, and is it spiritual? Is it really just God or heaven or the afterlife or whatever you believe trying to welcome you and pull you into it, or is it just your brain
Right.
synapses just going nuts because they're just desperately trying to cling to consciousness? It fascinating yet terrifying things to think about. But yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know at what point we're technically considered dead. And I don't, I think scientists would, and again, we were kind of talking about this off air, it's just general consensus of, is it 3 minutes? Is it 5 minutes? Is it 7 minutes when your heart is stopped? Is it 7 seconds?
Right.
And it's just, what does the medical community believe today? And that would have been different 50 years ago, and it'll probably be different 50 years from now or 100 years from now. And, but yeah, it would be interesting to hear from a professional. So if any professionals are listening, let us know,
Yeah, please.
because we
Because
would.
it all starts with one moment where it stops. So how long does it take to have that type of experience? I don't know.
Yeah, very interesting. But again, I just think it's fascinating that you saw yourself moving. Like it wasn't just your dead body floating in the water, or, because that's the typical out of body experience.
Right. No one had to pull me up out of the water, do chest compressions or anything like that. I mean, I was just waist high. I didn't know how I got there. I did have water in my lungs. I was coughing up water. But like I said, beyond that, those are the details. I don't know how it happened, why it happened.
And just to further make you squirm, if,
Oh,
and
great.
I'm sorry about this, but if your consciousness or soul had left your body, who was still in there moving it and trying to swim back to shore? Like who was controlling your body, getting you back to shore if you were just kind of out of it and watching?
Well, we know each other very well. You can probably assume that I had thought that when I said that this is a little terrifying, the way that you're describing it. That was my immediate thought. And so great. So who am I? Who's in this body?
Well, you're back in it now, so that's I guess all that matters. But who's
I
in there?
hope it's actually me. Who knows?
Who knows? Yeah, crazy, crazy. But yeah, I do remember you telling me that story a while
Yeah,
back. So very interesting. So thank you for sharing that one too.
sure. The other one has the last one that I wanted to talk about um, happened to be around death. Like back in 2015, I had a friend, and we weren't really good friends. We were on the verge of becoming friends. I had that's right about the time where I had taken up an interest in playing the drums, and he was a drummer, so he was teaching me things. And he suffered a terrible accident where he fell down the stairs, and he didn't die, but he never really fully recovered. And eventually, after lingering for about a month, he died from the injuries that he had sustained. So it was very sad. And a short time after that, there was a wake. I went to the wake, and it was an open casket, and his skin looked sort of purple. It didn't really seem like him, because whatever made him, and he was filled with life. He loved to laugh, and the way that he played the drums. I remember one time he started playing the drum intro to Led Zeppelin's Rock and Roll, and he did it spot on. If I had my eyes closed, I would swear that it was Bono, playing over the speakers, because it was just spot on. It was a thing of beauty. And for me, that's who he was. This jolly guy who liked to laugh, who loved rock and roll, who loved playing the drums and took it so seriously. Um, so seeing him there in that casket, it didn't really seem like him. Uh, Once the service was over, someone brought over drumsticks, the last pair that he had, taken out of the wrapping and everything, and they laid the drumsticks on his chest, and that's when I got emotional, because for me, that's who he was. He was this musician. He was this wonderful guy, and I still think about him often. This was back in 2015. Well, anyway, so that evening I went home, and by this point it was about 9:30, and I didn't really want to go to sleep. Everyone here was asleep, and I just didn't feel like going to bed yet. So I started watching something. I don't even remember what it was that I was watching. Maybe I was just flipping through the channels. That's when I still had cable, that life where you would just endlessly go through the channels,
Hmm.
trying to find something, and just channel surfing. Uh, and then I remember I did put in a movie at that point. Um, but I didn't really want to see it. I was starting to get tired. I knew there was no way that I was going to be able to finish it. So I said, okay, that's it. I'll go to bed. Kind of like a child who's being told to go to bed, but doesn't really want to, was really tired, but wants to force themselves to stay up. That's where I was. So anyway, so I walk over to my TV, and I had a Samsung Blu-ray player at the time, a really, really old one that still had a display on it. So I turned off the unit. I put the remote controls down. You know me, I'm very organized. The
Hmm.
controls for the TV go here. The controls for the Blu-ray player, the cable box, whatever, go here. It's just very regimented. So I shut it off. I put the controls down, and I started to walk away from the unit. Uh, right as I was about to leave the room, the unit turns back on. And when the unit turned back on, that type of Blu-ray player would say hello. So I'm like, it's kind of strange. So I turn around and I shut it off. It's like I didn't think anything of it, electrical things happen. Walking away again, turns back on again. I'm like, okay, now I think we can say that this is a little strange. So I go back, shut it off, start walking away, turns back on again for the third time. And at that point, I didn't move closer to the TV. I just stood there for a second. And I set the date. And I don't remember what the date was, other than it was 2015. I set the full date and I said that this is my home. And I walked to the TV and I shut it off again. I waited there, nothing happened. I started walking away. I left the room and that was the last time. But each time, each of the three times that it turned on, the Blu-ray player, when it turns on, it says hello.
Yeah, very, very
It,
strange.
it was a little strange.
And again, skeptics will say, oh, it was stray remote control signals, it was stray radio signals, it's electronics, these things malfunction. And yeah, that's in the realm of possibility. Uh, but you know, and I had mentioned one of my electronics a few episodes back. I believe I don't know if you were on it. I can't even remember. 50 episodes in. But there was a lamp that I had taken from my grandparents, and it was a touch lamp.
Yeah.
And we'd go to bed every night and turn it out. We wake up in the morning and it'd be on.
Mm-hmm.
And after some testing, we figured out it would just, you turn it out and it would go on about 15 seconds later, 20 seconds later. And it was usually like we turn it out at night and go up the stairs. So we wouldn't see it turn back on because now we're upstairs. But once we started testing it, you say, okay, this is clearly faulty. It clearly follows a pattern. Not every time, but probably 5 times out of 10, you turn it off and 15 seconds later, 20 seconds later, it turn back on by itself. Uh, so there are ways to sort of, when you're around your own equipment, uh, your TVs, your DVD players, whatever it is, when they act weird. Uh, and that thing just does it. It's on its last legs. It's old. It acts wonky. Uh,
Yeah, and I have to say, it never happened before that, never happened after that. And that's the only time that that happened.
right. Like my parents have a TV in like their guest room, and it'll just turn on sometimes. And it's just one of those things where it happens regularly enough where you can be like, this is a faulty TV. There's something probably, it's an older TV. There's probably something wrong with the power supply or the power
Was it in
switch.
the front room of 68th Street?
No, this isn't their current house.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah. No, this is
Because that would be something else, I think.
yeah, yeah. Well, 68th Street did have, my brother Jeff said, a few times he
TV.
was up there and there was a TV in there, an old tube TV, little one, like little kitchen
Yeah, I remember it.
13-inch or 14-inch TV
I would I would never go back into the room after those things that happened to me, but you would have to walk up the stairs to get to your apartment, and you could see inside,
right.
and I could see the little TV on the stand there. That wasn't there when I was there. Well, those two instances that I talked about. What was that? What was that episode?
I could pull it up.
Episode 20, the haunted guest room.
Okay, yeah.
There's no little TV or stand there when I was there.
Yeah, I think that was before then because then eventually my grandparents got a new TV for the kitchen. They got like a flat screen for the kitchen and they just put that one upstairs. And then that's when
Yeah.
Jeff said, there was one night, I think it was just one night where him and his friend were in there and the TV just kept turning on
Well, there
by
you go.
itself. Yeah. And I
Yeah.
never, and I think he even asked me, he's like, "Hey, does that TV go on by itself?" I was like, "No, I live in this apartment. Like I'm kind, and you had to go through that bedroom to get to the front porch,
Yeah.
which is on the second floor.
Right.
And in the nice weather, I would always open that door and let the screen, the screen door, and let the air kind of flow through. And every night, I would just, because we live in New York City, just even if I didn't open anything, I'd go in there. That was just part of my nighttime
Routine.
routine. Like right before I went to bed, I'd go and make sure all the windows were locked,
Yeah.
make sure the door was closed and locked.
Sure.
Because it was very easy to climb up those porches, and
Yeah.
if there's an open window, someone can get in very easily. And it happened in the neighborhood. Um, so I was in that room at least a couple of times a day, and I never saw the TV on if I hadn't turned it on, which I never did. I never, had a need to turn it was a little antenna TV. Wasn't hooked up to cable or anything, and I had cable. So why am I going to go in there and watch this little tiny 13-inch TV when I had a big TV in my living room?
Yeah.
But for him, it was like that one night where it just kept turning on by itself. So it's kind of like when you get these isolated incidents, it makes you wonder, because it's not just a thing that happens. Like I said, like with my lamp or my parents' TV, which just every now and then just turns on by itself, and it's kind of this not like clockwork regularity, but it happens regularly enough where you can sort of say, okay, that's more likely an electrical glitch or a wiring problem rather than something supernatural or paranormal. But for like your Blu-ray player, it's just interesting that it happened after a wake. It happened when you were kind of emotional and trying to stay up, and then you finally wanted to go to bed, and here's this thing keeps coming on and flashing the hello. Like, why didn't the TV come on? Why didn't another appliance come on? It's like the one thing in your living room that is going to be like hello.
Right.
So very strange. And again, the fact again that it didn't happen before, didn't happen
No.
since. Uh,
By the time it happened, that unit was really old to begin with, and I had it for a few more years after that. I only recently got rid of it. I think it was earlier this year, in fact, that I got rid of it. So never before, never since.
right. So you'd figure if it was a stray signal, it's probably a neighbor. It's probably, like it's going to happen again as someone's using their remote. Again, it's not out of the realm of possibility that it was just a one-time thing.
Yeah,
Very
sure.
possible that it's just a pure coincidence. But
It was the circumstance really that made it unusual.
right, it wasn't just a random night. It was a night where you were at a wake, for a
Yeah.
friend, and you were feeling emotional. And again, a lot of these things follow that. People will talk about they have experiences. It's not just on a random night. It's the night of my grandmother's funeral, the night of my uncle's wake, or the night we lost our baby. Like a lot of these things are connected to traumas or deep emotional feelings, that it's not just a normal day. So I, had a normal day at work, came home, popped the Blu-ray player on, and it was acting weird. And you may not have even, connected it at that point. You may have, if it were that, you may not have even remembered the story. It would have just been like another, that's weird. But maybe you're coming home from this wake
Yeah.
and it's just like, hello, hello, hello. It happens 3 times. And the fact that it didn't happen again after you sort of spoke to whatever, saying, this is the date, this is my house, and then it just kind of stopped. So it was almost like responding to you and like, okay, I'm going to try to stop communicating with you. Not saying that that's what it was, but
Yeah, no, I mean there were plenty of times where I came home and I'll probably frankly do it tonight. Fight, sleep, and want to put in a movie, usually a Hammer movie, and know that there's no way that I'm going to be able to finish it. Um, and there's been so many nights like that. That's the only one that stands out because of the circumstances of what led up to it.
right. And again, like like I said, your appliances, they have quirks to them. Like, if your TV just turns on randomly by itself once a week, you're just like, okay, that's what my TV does. In my apartment, like if you're sitting in the living room and you angle the remote control just right, it'll turn the TV in my bedroom on. So there's
Oh,
lots of nights where Jake and I are just sitting here and the TV in my bedroom just turns on by itself. But it's only if we're in the living room, you know, playing with the Roku and changing channels or changing the volume, and then my TV will just come on. You can see the blue glow in my room. It's not a ghost. It's just, just the weird angle, I guess, where Jake sits, whereas it doesn't really happen where I sit. My seat is just a foot or two over from his, but he must be just sitting at the right angle where the little rays from the remote control, when he's using it, will hit my TV and turn it on. And they don't do the same things. Like the volume in my living room will like turn my TV on. And then other things will like change the Roku channel when we're
Oh
not
wow.
changing the Roku channel. So it's weird,
Yeah.
but I've never once been like, oh, it's a ghost. It's just, it's clearly just um, the signal's bouncing a weird way. And again, I think if that were the case with you, it would have happened at some point again, or prior to that. It wouldn't have just been, you had this thing for 5 years, and then one night you come back from a wake, it's turning on and saying hello, and then you have it for another 5, 6 years, and it never does it again.
Never.
It doesn't seem like an electrical glitch. It doesn't seem like a random remote control stray signal because you
No,
think.
and I checked, I was like, okay, I checked all three and they were where I placed them. So it wasn't like they were in like a cushion. No one else in the house had them. Everyone else was asleep.
And
And
there's clearly no neighbors near you out there on the moors. So,
right. So
uh,
who did it?
unless Nessie is.
I had an uncle back in the old country. I would go to the old country over summer break. And I would always hear that he had the ability to change the TV with a sneeze. When he sneezed really powerfully, and these are the old tube TVs. This is like very early in like the late 70s, early 80s. And I would hear this story and I didn't believe it until I saw it one day. I needed proof of this. And the sneeze that came out of his head, it was like an explosion. It was so loud. And the channel changed. It's like it is true. I couldn't believe it. Uh, I don't know that that's odd and untold. It's definitely untold. I guess it was odd in its own way.
It's a little odd, but yeah. And again, I don't know if that's paranormal or just,
Yeah,
like that, but that's weird that he's sneezing so hard that like the channel changed.
yeah. It
Um,
was monstrous.
I think you've told me that story before because that
Yeah,
that feels familiar to me.
yeah.
Um,
So
but
many
yeah,
stories.
yeah, and that's the thing. I think when you're open to this stuff, you just notice the little things more. And again, like we always say on our shows, we're not saying that this is paranormal or supernatural
No.
or proof of God or proof of an afterlife. It's just weird things that happen in your brain. And I've said this a lot, like our brains are programmed to know when things are wrong. And this has come up a lot. People talk about this online, and I know you're not on social media, but I read a lot of social media, and they talk about this a lot with CGI, and it's called the uncanny valley. And they were talking a lot about it with like She-Hulk when she turns into She-Hulk, and the CGI is not good. You could just tell it's fake. Like your brain tells you like that is not how a living, breathing thing moves and operates. So it doesn't matter, they can spend millions of dollars on that CGI. If it's not perfect, your brain picks up on that and says, no, that is fake. That's not real. And I think there's just lots of things in life where we register that like something's not right here. And it's not even that we're necessarily looking for, because I always tell people like, yeah, I'm into the paranormal, but I don't live and breathe it. I'm not constantly
Yeah,
going through life looking for a paranormal explanation for everything, looking for a spiritual explanation. Most things that occur to me and happen to me, if I'm in the woods and I hear something, I'm much more concerned that it's a bear than it's Bigfoot.
yeah,
If I hear something in my house, I live in New York City, not on the British Highlands like you do. Um, I live in New York City, so if I hear something in my house, my first thought is someone broke in. I'm not thinking ghost. I'm not
yeah,
thinking, oh, it's my dead grandmother or it's a spirit. I'm worried like, hey, do I have to call the police? And it's only after you rule out all these other things, you say, okay, well, I clearly heard something in my house and there's no intruder, there's no broken window, nobody broke in. What was that? Like that's really what it comes down to. And like, but your brain knows like what you heard or you saw. or you experienced, and it knows when it's wrong. It knows when it's like, okay, that kind of sounded like someone breaking in, but also not. Like there's something about it that didn't sound like what a person walking around the house should sound like. It sounded similar to that, just like CGI is like an approximation of what a human being would look like if they transformed into a green giant, but it's not quite there. And your brain, it just won't cooperate with you trying to push it away and say, oh no, it's totally fine. There's that little niggling feeling in the back of your brain that says, no, something here is off.
I always find it interesting that people always say about CGI, not specifically from that show, but I've heard it for years. Oh, that looks so fake. And I always think to myself, in a very literal sense, well, yeah, it's all fake. But it's exactly what you're saying. There's something they don't buy it. There's something off about it.
Right. Right. And again, it's like if you see a physical model of a spaceship, your brain knows that's not, the Millennium Falcon isn't real. Those Star Destroyers aren't real. The Enterprise isn't real, but it's a real thing. You can tell someone built it. It's a physical
Yeah.
thing, and maybe it's not as big as, they're telling you it is on screen, or moving as fast as they're telling you it's moving. But when you see a CGI spaceship, you're like, okay, it doesn't move quite like a real physical object would. They still don't have it perfect where the weight and the physics, and whereas a physical model, if they're moving it down a track, it's got weight to it. So your brain accepts it much more readily than CGI.
Yeah. I guess we're old fashioned. I will always prefer a model on a track, that is blows up over CGI.
Yeah, me too. It's just it looks more real, and you can do more with it. You do more with a mechanical shark, or a man in an alien costume, and it looks better. And even if you got to put it in the dark, or you can't show too much of it, I'd rather that than the fake CGI that you're just like, that just looks really bad. And it takes you out of the moment. Because
Yeah.
like I said, your brain tells you this is not real. And it's hard to kind of get lost in it. Like, you're watching Jaws and you forget that that's a fake shark sometimes. It just looks so real. Uh, Whereas, you watch Sharknado or something, something with like completely CGI sharks, and you just like, there's nothing disturbing or frightening or scary, it just takes you out of that moment, and you're not enjoying the movie because you're just like, oh man, the CGI is so bad. It's
The
cheesy.
example I was going to use was 1981 Clash of the Titans versus the 2010 Clash of the Titans with Medusa.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I love both movies. I always prefer the 1981 version because Medusa, it's claymation, right?
Right.
Essentially. But I prefer that over the bad CGI where it looks less than real. At least the other thing actually is real. I just filmed and frame by frame.
Yeah, it's fake, but it's still a physical thing.
Right.
And we can set, like, our brains sense that this is real. It's not just pixels moving,
Right.
because the CGI can be very two-dimensional, whereas a real thing doesn't matter if it's claymation and old and outdated, it's still a real thing. And I think that can just add to the ethereal nature of this Medusa like creature, or whatever it is, whether you're watching King Kong, or any of those
Right.
old things. It's just, it's a physical thing. It's not just some computer generated, essentially a realistic looking cartoon. That's what CGI really is. It's just
Yeah, that's what it is.
cartoons. um which I think is funny about, like, the live action Disney remakes, which are all just CGI anyway. It's just fancy animation. It's not live action. They're not using real tigers for the Lion King. They're not using real mermaids. It's all CGI. It's just fancy computer generated cartoons that is not live action. So you're still watching it, and you get that uncanny valley. You're like, this is not right. There's something off here. And it takes you out of that moment. And it's the same thing with experiences. I think it's just our brains know when something isn't right in the world that we know it. You see a light in the sky, and sometimes you'll cock your head, and then a few minutes later, like, oh yeah, that was clearly a plane. But then there's other times where you're just like, You can try to convince yourself all you want, but your brain is telling you no, that there's something wrong about that. There's something off about it. So what was it? So very interesting stuff. And yeah, your
What
Blu-ray
was it?
player telling you hello.
Yeah.
So what was that? Again, we're not saying supernatural, we're not saying paranormal, we're not saying it was a ghost, but very weird stuff. So do you have any other stories tonight, or are we going to wrap it up there? We're at about an
I
hour
think we
here.
can wrap it up there. There's one more story that I have that I will. It's just a little teaser right now. I did actually previously mention part of the story in episode 7, um, and that story takes a little bit longer to tell. So I'll tell it on some future episode.
All right. Awesome. Very cool. All right, man. So thanks for coming on once again. And
Thank you for having me.
your fans will be very happy. I know you have a few of them out there now.
That
Uh,
was that is amazing, and I appreciate it.
yeah, yeah. Well, again, I think people appreciate intelligence and open-mindedness. And, we're not on here telling people, we saw a ghost or we saw a UFO. We're just kind of saying, here's what we saw, and you guys make of it what you will. And
Yeah, believe whatever you believe.
yeah, yeah.
Totally valid.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I want to have you back on for the Hammer films. We have all sorts of films we want to talk
Yeah,
about, and maybe we can do those
we're
more around
planning
Halloween.
things.
We are planning things, so you're going to be
Yeah,
on many more times. But I think our personal stories are kind of dwindling. Um,
yeah. There's
I know
just
I'm
the
pretty
one
much
left.
out.
Yeah,
Yeah,
there's just the one left.
yeah. You got one more left, which is a good one, very
Yeah,
good one. It's a
yeah.
doozy. It's a doozy. But
It
yeah,
is.
you say you kind of saving one of the best ones for last, I think. But
Yeah,
um,
but
yeah.
then
So
we can talk about music and films and all sorts of things we
yeah,
have planned out. It'll be fun.
definitely. Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
All right, brother. Well, thanks again for coming on. I always appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank
And
you.
I got to get over there to England sometime and cross
Yeah,
the moors and see you. And
I think that's the reason why we haven't hung out. I mean, the flight, man.
yeah, just let the drawbridge down so I can cross the moat and
Yeah, exactly. And you're welcome to stay as long as you want.
don't pour
Don't
boiling
go,
oil
don't
on
go
me
to
as
the
I stand at
moors
the gate.
at night, all that stuff you hear in movies. It's
Yeah,
true.
definitely.
All true.
All true. All right, brother. Well, thanks again.
All right.
This was
Thank you.
awesome.
Yeah.
And I'll talk to you soon.
All right. Take
All
care.
right, man. Take care.
Bye.
Bye. All right. I want to thank my buddy John for coming on once again and telling some really awesome stories. This week, we kind of delved into spirituality and out of body experiences and just more unexplainable things that aren't necessarily ghost stories, but are still weird and paranormal in their way. So if you guys have thoughts about what John experienced, please leave them in the comments below. We love hearing from you guys. We love the feedback. And if you have a weird, spooky, strange story that you want to share, where's my hand? There we go. And I'm going to go over here. So odd and untold, Jason at oddanduntold.com. And you can email me and share your stories and I could read them on the air. You can come on the air. I'm a pretty easy guy to get along with. As you can see with my banter with John, we've known him for 35 years. But even if I don't know you, I'm friendly. I'm non-judgmental. We love hearing your stories on here. So please, if you have a story you'd like to share, feel free to comment. If you're listening on a podcast platform, whether it's Apple or Spotify, please leave us a review. We love reviews. We love the feedback. You don't have to write anything out. Leave us as many stars as you think we deserve. Not asking for 5 stars, just anything you think we deserve on here. Please keep in mind I have co-hosts. I have John, who's a guest, but he's also a co-host at this point. Josh and Scott, who are co-hosts. We all try to bring you great content every week and just interesting content. And we appreciate any feedback you can give us. So until next week, everybody, rock and roll.